Honorable members, the prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our King, to his government, to members of the Legislative Assembly, and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Honourable members, we will now be led in the singing of our national anthem by Mr. Timothy Knoll. I invite you to participate in the language of your choice.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Please be seated. Just a sec. Hang on. Honourable members, as is our custom, we would traditionally pay tribute to members and former members of this assembly who have passed away since we last met. However, I hope that you'll provide me some forgiveness as I have decided to postpone the tribute for former member Mike Cardinal until Monday, March 6th, when his family is in attendance.
Introduction of visitors.
Honourable members, for your awareness, I have a number of introductions today which will not take away from any of the time allotted for members to introduce other guests. However, I did have the privilege this morning of hosting a very special guest who's joining me in the Speaker's Gallery. We had a wonderful opportunity to debate the merits of Beauchesne's over House of Commons procedures and practice and other parliamentary discussions. The Honourable Anthony Rota, the Speaker of the Federal House of Commons. He is joined by his wife, Chantal Pichet Rota, and his Chief of Staff, Alexander. Please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce a couple of other guests who are joining us in the Speaker's Gallery today, including the best scow of this place, the Honourable the Government House Leader's spouse, Nicole Scow. Also joining us in the Speaker's Gallery today is the former member for Chestermere Rockyview, Mr. Bruce McAllister. If you both would like to rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly. And last but certainly not least, I think we can all agree that today's rendition of O Canada was something special, as it was led by Mr. Timothy Knoll. Mr. Knoll, in his assistance to help us honor and mark Black History Month, the month of February, joined us today to lead us in the national anthem. His father immigrated from Grenada in 1973. Here he is today leading the Assembly in the singing of O Canada as the first Afro-Caribbean Albertan to lead this House in the singing of our national anthem. Please rise and receive the welcome.
Introduction of guests.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert has a school group to introduce.
The Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce you to a grade 6 class from Sister Alphonse Academy with teacher Sean Bass and a special guest, Christy Rouse, who is a mom and helper today, but also a trustee for St. Albert Public Schools School Board. If they could all rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly. Not sure where they are.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clareview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise and introduce to you and through you to all members of the Assembly 34 brilliant students from Belvedere Elementary School. They're joined by their amazing teacher, Bonnie Clydesdale. I've had numerous opportunities of speaking to Belvedere School during Read-In Week, and so I ask that all of the students rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honourable Member for Cypress Medicine Hat.
Through you, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome one of my constituents. She is a grandma, a musician, and a true leader within the freedom movement. She gave hope to all of Alberta, Canada, and the world. She was proud to stand strong and free in face of the worst government overreach in a generation. Tamara Leach. Tens of thousands of Canadians supported and helped Tamara. This includes a constitutional lawyer from Alberta who held the Prime Minister account during the Emergency Act inquiry. Please welcome Eva Chipiuk and Tamara Leach. Ladies, please stand and accept the warm welcome.
The Honourable Member for Livingston McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor today, to you and through you, to introduce to this House Lynette Soldan, who is the Executive Director of Rowan House Society in High River, an organization I have had a chance to brag about often in this House. So please rise and receive the warm traditional greeting of the House.
The Honourable Member for Lesser Slave Lake has an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to introduce to you and through you from Lesser Slave River, Deputy Reeve Lana Spencer, and also from the same Lesser Slave River, Reeve Murray Carrick. Both of them work tirelessly in order to help fulfill the dreams of their constituents. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to rise this afternoon and introduce to you and through you two guests to the Assembly. First, I have Mr. Ken Drysdale. Mr. Drysdale is an innovator, an entrepreneur, and with deep ties in the community, and he's working tirelessly to reform healthcare for the residents of Grand Prairie. I'd like to thank him for his efforts. And beside him, I have Owen Lewis, a lawyer and managing partner at KMSC Law. Gentlemen, please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
The Honourable the Minister of Municipal Affairs, do you have an introduction today?
Saskatchewan Legislative Assembly, as well as the Senate of Canada, the former Lieutenant Governor of Saskatchewan, and my good friend, Gordon Barnhart. I'd like to welcome Gordon to our legislature as a recently new resident of Alberta.
For West Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce through you and to all members of the Assembly a couple of amazing constituents of West Yellowhead, the Mayor of Jasper, Richard Ireland, and Joan Tour is a student at McEwen and resident of Hinton. Please rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Are there others? Seeing none, the clerk.
Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre has a statement to make.
Primary care is the foundation of our healthcare system. At its best, it's one of the most personal, powerful connections we have with one of life's most personal things, our health. But over the last few years, the UCP have attacked that foundation with every tool they had. When they launched their war on doctors in February 2020, they took particular aim at family doctors, cutting their pay, withholding resources, harassing them online and in person, and forcing them to deal with mountains of new paperwork just as the pandemic slammed into Alberta. Many were forced to close clinics or lay off staff, others retired early, left the profession or the province. Fast forward to today, hundreds of thousands of Albertans have no access to primary care and are forced instead to go to emergency rooms or go without care. More victims of the healthcare chaos created by the UCP. But, Mr. Speaker, unlike the UCP, we have a plan to repair and strengthen primary care, to restore the foundation of our healthcare system with family health teams, a plan that the former chair of the University of Alberta's Department of Family Medicine, Dr. Rick Spooner, calls a pathway to the evolution of primary care in Alberta. A family health team can include family doctors as well as a wide diversity of other healthcare professionals working collaboratively to provide care. One location to get help for health concerns. We'll invest $600 million over 4 years to help existing clinics, practices, and PCNs expand their teams, and we'll invest to build and staff 10 new health clinics in communities of greatest need across the province. The UCP, they've just got plans to make more plans. So this May, Albertans will have a choice. Danielle Smith and the UCP, who've created chaos in primary care and now want applause for simply revoking their own disaster.
Order. Welcome back to the Assembly. The honourable member knows that the use of proper names is wildly inappropriate, and the honourable members know that the interruption of member statements is wildly inappropriate. The honourable member, you have 20 seconds remaining.
The Premier and the UCP have created chaos in primary care and now want applause for simply revoking their own disastrous policies and bad decisions, or Rachel Notley and the Alberta NDP, ready to move forward with a bold plan that will ensure 1 million more... Oh, sorry. I apologize, Mr. Speaker.
Perhaps you can try again tomorrow. The honourable member for Livingston McLeod. Oh, correction. The honourable member for Sherwood Park has a statement to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday we learned that before she claimed to be against the Just Transition plan to shut down energy jobs in Alberta, the Leader of the Opposition was for it. Now, this doesn't surprise anyone on this side of the House. We know the Opposition Leader and her party eliminated jobs in Alberta, 183,000 of them to be exact. And Albertans know it too. It's one of the reasons why they fired the members across the aisle in 2019 and chose our government to lead Alberta into better days. Today, Mr. Speaker, we can confidently say Albertans made the right choice. Thanks to the policies of our government, Alberta is leading the nation in economic growth. We've kept taxes low. We've balanced the budget, which has brought our credit rating back up. We've created hundreds of thousands of new jobs for Albertans, and we've welcomed tens of billions of dollars in new investment from major international companies like Amazon, HBO, Walmart, Air Products, Dow, de Havilland, and more. We've diversified the economy, and now new industries like film and television, agri-food processing, and technology are booming in Alberta and setting records for investment. We've welcomed a record number of new families who want to participate in the Alberta Advantage. We're providing direct affordability supports to Albertans who need them, and broad supports that will benefit everyone. We're tackling long-standing issues in healthcare, and as we learned yesterday, we're starting to see improvements in the system. And we're standing up for our province against hostility and interference from Ottawa. Albertans should visit puttingalbertansfirst.ca to learn more about the work we've done to renew the Alberta Advantage. But later today, Mr. Speaker, we will all see a new budget, and I believe this will be one of the best budgets our province has ever produced. We didn't get to this enviable place by accident either, Mr. Speaker. We got here because our government put the right policies in place, and now we're getting the right results.
Order! The honourable member for Calgary North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta's economy is recovering strongly, and it continues to gain momentum through steady job creation and diversification. Alberta has created a vast number of jobs in a short period of time, thus replacing all other job losses during the pandemic. Along with stellar job growth numbers, Alberta's labour force has also steadily increased. More and more Canadians continue to come to this great province because there are opportunities available for everyone. Alberta is diversifying the economy by creating opportunities in technology, in innovation, as well as our film and television industry. The brand new HBO series, The Last of Us, is a prime example of how impressive and experienced Alberta's film crews are. Our government incentives enable many high-profile companies like Amazon, IT companies, and manufacturers to come to Alberta, creating hundreds of permanent jobs. To assist Albertans with high inflation, Mr. Speaker, our government put a pause on collecting the provincial fuel tax of 13.6 cents per litre, thus allowing Alberta to have the lowest fuel price in Canada. Along with re-indexing the provincial tax brackets for inflation, we are also providing substantial rebates on electricity bills. Mr. Speaker, more than 1 million Albertans have enrolled and are scheduled to receive their affordability payments of $600. Albertans are receiving real, tangible support during these times of high inflation. Year 2022 was about celebrating a huge budget surplus, paying down our debts, growing industry, supporting businesses, enhancing trade infrastructures, improving healthcare deliveries, and providing inflation relief. I am so excited, Mr. Speaker, to see what the budget 2023 has in store for all of us here in Alberta. Thank you.
Order. The Honourable, the member for Edmonton. The Honourable member for St. Albert.
As we approach the spring election, there are clear differences that separate us from the UCP government. The Alberta NDP is focused on things that matter to Albertans. We will make sure that every Albertan has access to a family doctor. That's why we released a comprehensive plan to get 1 million more Albertans access to a doctor. We're also focused on addressing the inflation crisis, helping Albertans' families manage, including guaranteeing that nobody will ever pay out of pocket to see a doctor. But this Premier has the wrong priorities. She's obsessed with reckless and extreme ideas that will increase the costs to Alberta families. She wants to fire the RCMP, making your community less safe and downloading additional costs to municipalities. Despite massive backlash, the Premier is pushing forward with her plan to get rid of the RCMP to create a new provincial police force to the cost of $366 million in startup, with $735 million a year in operating. Her plan fails to deliver any additional services, and Albertans will be on the hook to pay more in property taxes. The Premier also wants to gamble with Canada Pension, making your future less secure. She is continuing to move forward with the plan to pull Albertans out of the Canada Pension Plan, despite the lack of public support. She's risking retirement savings of Alberta workers while hitting taxpayers with more costs. In 90 days, Albertans have a choice to continue with the UCP government that prioritizes reckless ideological ideas for their fringe extremists that will continue to hurt Albertans, or move forward with an Alberta NDP government that is focused on what matters to you. The choice could not be clearer.
Yeah. Hear, hear.
The Honourable member for Grand Prairie.
A common concern in Grand Prairie is the shortage of family doctors for our young and growing community, which leads to an array of challenges and delays for my constituents in seeking care or diagnosis. Ideally, increasing efficiency, accessibility, and service within the region is the goal, with all reforms centered around better outcomes. Thanks to the innovative work of the Mascot Medical Centre Board, that is exactly what we are working towards in Grand Prairie today. And as I mentioned earlier in introductions, I'm pleased to be joined in the gallery this afternoon by Mr. Ken Drysdale, the chair of the Mascot Board and the driving force for this initiative. The Mascot Medical Centre will be a multi-specialty, patient-centered diagnostics facility based on the Mayo Clinic model and is close to being a reality, Mr. Speaker. Pending approval from Alberta Health, Mascot will be publicly funded and accessible to all, run as non-profit, and will provide life-saving care for our people in the northern region. By implementing a patient-centered collaborative diagnostic practice, the Mascot Medical Centre will connect patients and their physicians with the right specialists to provide an early, quick, and accurate diagnosis. Mascot is already fully engaged in striking a detailed partnership with the University of Alberta that will provide clinical access to over 450 specialists, and Mascot is actively collaborating with Northwestern Polytechnic to lease adjacent land and integrate with existing medical training programs in the region. This medical home approach to healthcare will expand the capacity for medical residents to train in Grand Prairie and will increase the number of family physicians in our community over time, addressing this critical shortage. This type of thought leadership, coupled with the can-do culture in our region, is exactly what is required to transform healthcare, Mr. Speaker. Too many families in our region have been adversely impacted due to delays in acquiring diagnostic and specialist care, which is why the vision for this clinic resonates so deeply within my community. I believe Mascot is one large step forward in improving healthcare and health outcomes for the good people of the Peace Country. It is way past time for Grand Prairie and area residents to have access to health diagnoses and the timely treatment available to others in the other parts of the province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the time is now 1:50, and that makes it oral question period. And the Honourable member for Edmonton City Centre has question 1.
Barbara Ross, a 91-year-old Albertan, called 911. She's experiencing chest pains that left her barely able to stand. She needed an ambulance but was transferred to 811 and eventually told to go to a clinic. Her daughter eventually took her to the Misericordia, where Barbara spent an entire day waiting to be admitted, sitting in agony in a chair. Things like this happen every day. Barbara's is just one horror story in an endless list. Healthcare is in crisis. It's been in crisis for years as a result of this government's horrible, incompetent, and cruel decisions. Is the Premier really going to stand here today and claim that the crisis in our healthcare system is over?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all have our heart broken when we hear stories like that, which is why we made the decision very early on to put in Dr. John Cowell as the head and official administrator of Alberta Health Services so we could accelerate changes in the system. And I am so pleased to report that we are seeing year-over-year increase in ambulance response time. What we saw last January, is there were over 1,000 incidents of code reds in Edmonton, meaning there wasn't an ambulance available when it was needed. That's gone down to 82. That's a 92% reduction. We've seen a 92%. We've seen a 60% reduction in Calgary as well.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
There was no ambulance for Barbara Ross. Monica was forced to play the lottery to keep her family doctor, and she lost. She's on a list of patients dropped by her local clinic and far from alone. There are 40,000 people in Lethbridge without a doctor, mothers living in communities an hour from here are being forced to drive into the city while in the middle of giving birth. Surgeries are being delayed. Specialists are meeting with cancer patients months after it could be too late to do anything. Again, will this Premier explain to all Albertans how she can stand here and claim that this is not a system in crisis?
The Honourable the Premier has the call.
Mr. Speaker, I accepted when I got elected in October that the system was in crisis, which is why I appointed an official administrator, and all of the measures are moving in the right direction. As I mentioned, a 92% decrease in code reds in Edmonton, 60% decrease in code reds in Calgary. We've also seen since November of 22, the number of patients waiting longer than the clinically recommended time has gone down 9.4%. Wait in an emergency room is down 10%. We intend to spend $158 million on physician recruitment and health professional recruitment. Things are moving in the right direction.
Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier fired the Board of AHS for a political vendetta, not to help Albertans. And speaking of specialists, days ago my colleague stood with a St. Albert nurse named Sheila Ethier, whose partner was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and facing an 8-week delay to see an oncologist. Stage 4 cancer, a 2-month wait. The longest 2 months of this person's life. These people aren't being heard. They're clearly being ignored by this Premier. So will she stand today and apologize for trying to tell Albertans that what they see in front of their eyes, what they experience every day in this healthcare crisis isn't real?
Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, one of the advisors that I have is Dr. Raj Sherman, who is working every day in an emergency room. And one of the things that he told me was that patients were showing up in emergency room sicker because of the fear-mongering from people like those on the other side that the system could not take care of them. What we want to do is instill some calm, instill some confidence that the system is going to be there for them. All the measures are going in the right place. I certainly wouldn't want anybody to resist getting the medically necessary care they need because of the fear-mongering that they hear on the other side.
The order. The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, before the Premier took on her current role, she worked as a lobbyist, and in that role she supported a program that was designed to give $20 billion in royalty credits to companies to clean up wells they are already obligated to clean up as a condition of their drilling license. $20 billion to incent profitable corporations not to fulfill their legal obligations, but instead to wait for taxpayer cash to do it. Why is the Premier putting the interests of her friends and insiders, the people who worked on her leadership campaigns, ahead of the people of Alberta?
Good question. Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's simply not true. What we have done as a government is we have put in place a process where each energy company has a mandatory amount of money that they have to spend on liability cleanup. That's going to amount to over $700 million this year, escalating 9% per year as we go forward. We have a $30 billion liability problem. This is a problem that I have known about since 1997 when I started landowner advocacy. The members opposite had an opportunity to address it. They failed. It is up to us to make sure we're standing up for landowners, municipalities, and First Nations.
The order. The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
The UCP's proposed $20 billion royalty handout was originally proposed by an organization called SAME. Sane's co-founder, Chris Kinnear, now works in the Premier's office, but the Premier has been extremely reluctant to answer questions about what he does or what special project he's supposedly working on, despite the potential for this $20 billion handout to tarnish the reputation of good actors in the energy sector who clean up after themselves. The project is suddenly proceeding to pilot. So, Premier, connect the dots for us. Is Mr. Kinnear working on anything besides handing out $20 billion?
The Honourable the Premier.
Once again, what the NDP is saying is just simply untrue. There is a pilot program that the Energy Minister he's consulting on at the moment, and what it is it's focused on the worst wells, because we have tried many different ways of trying to ensure that wells that have been inactive for more than since before 1980 and been inactive for more than 20 years get priority to clean up. Under the NDP, they just kept on getting transferred forward again and again to a new company. We have to make sure that we're cleaning these sites up. It's important for municipalities, it's important for First Nations, and it's important for landowners.
The Honourable Member.
It gets worse. There are even members of the UCP's own cabinet who don't support the Premier's $20 billion giveaway. When the current Premier was still working as a lobbyist, she wrote to the UCP Energy Minister asking her to consider, but the minister wrote back saying she didn't support the handout because it was, quote, a violation of the polluter pay principle. The current Premier won the leadership, removed the then Energy Minister, now Environment Minister, replaced her with the current Energy Minister, a vocal supporter of the handout. So can the Premier explain why she thinks polluter pay should be replaced with Albertans?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we're talking about a targeted program that may be $100 million that is focused on making sure that the worst wells in Alberta.
The Honourable Premier has the call.
Focused on making sure that the worst wells in Alberta are taken care of. These are wells that have been around since the 40s and 50s and 60s. They had an opportunity to put a program in place that would have incentivized the cleanup of those sites. They failed at that. We cannot allow for this problem to continue to be passed forward to future generations. We owe it to future generations to make sure that these sites get returned to their natural condition as quickly as possible.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-McCall-Buller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, our border was held hostage by an illegal blockade, which costed Alberta's economy over $200 million. Some of the people involved stockpiled weapons and planned to kill the RCMP officers. When the Premier took over, she prioritized to get amnesty for those arrested at this blockade. The Premier even claimed that she called Crown prosecutors to get them to reconsider charges. Wow. Why did this Premier spend her time to get allegedly violent criminals off the hook? Is that really what Premier should be prioritizing?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there may be a point of privilege in here, but let me just say that the CBC published a false story. They published a story that my office staff had been calling Crown prosecutors. They had not seen emails. They are not in possession of emails. They made false allegations. We have put in a request to the Ombudsman to investigate this. We have asked for a retraction, and we have asked for an apology, and we are still waiting. But I would advise the member opposite not to repeat false claims, because they have absolutely no evidence at the CBC for the claims they made.
Order. The Honourable Member.
Premier, you admitted twice to have talked to Crown prosecutors. That's on record. And not only did the Premier admit that she was calling Crown prosecutor to get the amnesty for those who broke the law, but according to Arthur Pawlowski, who was arrested at the courts for encouraging blockade to continue, she promised to get him amnesty. This was a major theme of the Premier's leadership campaign, and she again twice claimed publicly that she was speaking to Crown prosecutors. To the Premier, what did she promise those arrested for holding Southern Alberta hostage and those threatening the lives of law enforcement?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, rather than call another point of personal privilege, let me also correct the record from what is being said across the aisle, which is simply not the case. I have always said that any communication that I had about the issue of amnesty would be done through the proper channels, which is my Justice Minister. And there is no question that I campaigned for 7 months saying I would look into that. And I can tell you what my Justice Minister told me. Number one, that a Premier does not have the power of amnesty. And number two, that we are waiting for the result of the Ingram decision. And I accepted what my Justice Minister told me, and that is what I've communicated.
The honourable member.
While the Premier prioritized trying to get lawbreakers amnesty for breaking the law, Albertans have suffered through a healthcare crisis, an affordability crisis, and a government that was slow to act to either. Our team put together jobs plan supported by Industrial Heartland, a healthcare plan that will get 1 million Albertan access to a family doctor supported by many in the medical profession. Mr. Speaker, it is clear what we are focused on. Will this Premier admit that her decision to call Crown prosecutors, which he admitted twice publicly, and seeking amnesty for lawbreaker was the wrong choice?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they're focused on fake stories. We're focused on addressing the issues for Alberta. My very first action when I became Premier was to focus on fixing the healthcare system. That was a #1 priority. They continue to talk down the frontline workers in the healthcare system. We're supporting them because we have confidence in them that they're going to be able to address the issues of Albertans with our support. And that's part of what we're doing. The other part of what we're doing is an affordability plan, which even Trevor Toome has said has counteracted the federal inflation crisis caused by the NDP coalition.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Macleod.
The Alberta Pension Plan is quite frankly one of the worst ideas this government has put forward. Respected economists, academics, and workers' representatives have all been adamantly opposed to the idea. And, Mr. Speaker, they are right. Seniors fear for their retirement security. Those considering retirement worry about their futures. Albertans want to keep their pension investments within the CPP. Period. Full stop. Why doesn't the Premier understand this?
Well, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we had a fair deal panel that did widespread consultations across the province. And one of the things that they asked us to do was to look at the feasibility of an Alberta pension plan. And if there was any decision to be made, it would be made through a public referendum of Albertans. We've had an initial report done, and we need more work done, quite frankly. It looks promising, but we want to make sure that Albertans have the most up-to-date information. That will be available, we've been told, sometime in May. And when the final report is available, we will put it out into the public and Albertans will decide.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Macleod.
Albertans do not want this Premier anywhere near their pensions. They have made it abundantly clear. Yet this government is refusing to listen to the very people they represent. They talk of a referendum, but they know already where Albertans stand. Thankfully, there is a vote coming. I suspect Albertans will have the final say on protecting their pensions, and that's how it should be. Will the Premier agree with me that the fate of Alberta's pensions is on the line in the coming spring election?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, no, I won't agree to that because there's a process we'd have to go through. We'd have to issue the report, we'd have to do public consultations, and we'd have to see whether or not Albertans even want to have a referendum on the issue of a change in pension plan. So there are many, many months of work ahead of us, but I will agree with the member opposite on this. This is Alberta's pension. It will be Alberta's choice. We listened to what Albertans said when they wanted us to investigate. It sounds to me like the members opposite would ignore what they heard from the Fair Deal panel, ignore what Albertans told them. We think it's our responsibility to put the information on the table and let Albertans decide.
The honourable member for Edmonton-Macleod.
Moving from the CPP to the Alberta Pension Plan is so unpopular, more than 60,000 Albertans signed a petition telling this government not to do it. Let me say that again, 60,000 and counting. Albertans work their whole adult lives building their retirement savings, and the UCP wants to gamble them away. It's shameful. Pension plans are not political games, and treating them as such is dangerous. I want to send a message to all Albertans. An Alberta NDP government will never treat Albertans' pensions like their fun money, as the UCP have. We could never be that careless. For the last time, can a Premier explain why she wants to gamble?
The Honourable the Premier.
Well, I wish the member members opposite would stop fear-mongering. I suppose it doesn't surprise me that they don't want to see the results of the report. They didn't want to see what Bill 1 looked like before they voted against it as well. We believe that Albertans want to see this information. They asked for us to do the report. We have done the report. We will release it when it becomes available. We're hoping that'll be in the next few months, and we look forward to having a robust discussion. We have always said, and this was the recommendation from the Fair Deal panel, if there is any decision to be made, it has to be made through a public referendum by Albertans, and that's what we've committed to.
Or Calgary, Glenmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta has the best frontline healthcare workers in the world. And this government is making meaningful changes to our healthcare system to improve outcomes for Albertans all across the province. Yesterday, the Minister of Health, along with the Premier and Dr. Cowell, released a 90-day report to provide us with a status update on this very important work. To the Minister of Health, can you please inform the members what results we've seen in EMS response times over the past 3 months?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Member for the question on this important issue. Mr. Speaker, we've seen significant progress over the past 3 months. During that time, since November, EMS added 39 frontline staff, including paramedics and emergency communications officers. EMS response in urban areas has improved by 22.1%, and remote areas have improved by 10%. EMS response times for most urgent calls improved across the province as well. That's in metro, urban, rural, and remote areas. 17 minutes in metro and urban areas, down from 21.8. 19.2 minutes in communities over 3,000, down from 21.5, and further improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the effectiveness of our healthcare system is an issue that impacts all Albertans, and given that Albertans deserve to have confidence that they will receive high-quality care with minimal wait times, can the Minister of Health please share how we're working to reduce wait times in emergency rooms and for surgeries, and what progress we're seeing so far?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're working with Dr. Cowell, our official administrator, and working with AHS, and I want to thank all of our healthcare workers on the front line for doing significant work over the last 3 months. We are making progress. The ED wait time to see a doctor went down by nearly 10% since November. The number of patients waiting longer than the clinically recommended time has decreased by 9.4%. By March 31st, 2023, AHS and the Chartered Surgical Facilities anticipate that they will complete 290,000 surgeries. That's a 4% increase over next year. And progress in lowering ED wait times has been seen in all three measures. And Mr. Speaker, we're going to keep working and bring those times down.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, given that a strong team of healthcare workers is critical to our system running smoothly, and given that the Premier committed to empowering our healthcare workers to make more decisions about the running of the system, can the Minister of Health please share how this will be achieved and his overall impression of these first 90 days of healthcare reform?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
And thanks once again to the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, as you know, on November 17th, we announced our Health Care Action Plan and promised Albertans that help is on the way. Wait times are trending down, and we are seeing a decrease in provincial averages for ambulances, surgeries, and emergency room waits over the last 90 days. We will continue to put in place the structure for both immediate and long-term reforms and changes. I know that Dr. Cowell has been meeting with AHS employees across the entire province, getting their input, and we'll keep driving changes until we get these times down.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Ellerslie is next.
Red Deer is Alberta's third largest city, and it currently has no doctors accepting new patients. On top of an already grim situation, the vital Red Deer Hospital expansion project continues to be delayed. Mr. Speaker, all of this is unacceptable. The people of Red Deer deserve timely, high-quality public health care. Yet the UCP promised that construction would begin in 2021, but now in 2023, nothing is started. Can the Minister please explain why they have chosen to delay this critical project every chance that they've had? Clearly, a strong public health care system isn't a value of the UCP, it is of the NDP, and I can't wait to deliver for Albertans.
The Honourable the Deputy Premier has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. This project is proceeding. In fact, the RFP for design is out, and we expect it to be completed and returned by the end of March. At that point, we can carry on with the design. And unlike the NDP, we believe in planning first. So we're going to do a good plan so we can do a good build, so we can meet the needs of people in central Alberta and Red Deer, giving them the health care they need in a good design building, meeting the needs of all citizens within central Alberta. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Ellerslie.
Given that walk-in clinics in Red Deer are overrun and this government has continued to delay the Red Deer Hospital expansion despite it being critical to the service of the Central Zone, and given that when pressed about the delays, Minister of Infrastructure insultingly said, quote, "There are complexities that most of the general public doesn't understand, and it's difficult to explain to them because it's tedious and very time-consuming." Will this minister apologize for this arrogant comment and admit to the people of Red Deer that their hospital was not a priority for this government over the last 4 years? It was. Construction would have started already.
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's ironic hearing from the NDP, who removed the Red Deer Hospital from the priority capital list, that it's not a priority. So we have put it back there, and in fact, what I did when I made those comments was when I went to Red Deer to talk face-to-face to the citizens of Central Alberta to answer their primary question, why does it take so long to build a hospital? We were trying to be very transparent. We had plans there. We had officials from my Department of Infrastructure, officials from the Department of Health, and we had AHS members all there to answer people's questions and help explain why does it take so long.
The Honourable Member.
Why does it?
Given that there are 0 doctors accepting new patients in Red Deer, which leaves thousands of Albertans without any form of primary care, and given that the lack of primary care leads to more cost and more burden on our hospitals because of far too many Albertans have nowhere else to go other than an emergency room, and given that the UCP have no plan to get Alberta as a doctor, and Alberta NDP have a comprehensive plan to get 1 million Albertans more doctors, which includes building a family health clinic in the new Red Deer Hospital, can the minister stand in this House and admit that we will deliver health care for Red Deer after 4 years of this government failing so badly?
The Honourable the Deputy Premier.
All the NDP will continue to do is make promises that they can't fulfill. So we're going to keep moving forward with good planning and good building, with all kinds of community consultation to make sure that they get the building that they need, the hospital care that they need, the services they need, planned well, delivered well, and in good time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud is next.
Recently, my colleagues and I went to visit the site of the South Edmonton Hospital. You know, the hospital that the Alberta NDP announced in 2017 and construction was supposed to begin in 2020. But, Mr. Speaker, that construction site was just an empty field. The UCP, without saying anything to the people of South Edmonton, have delayed this project countless times and now indefinitely. Wow. The UCP clearly do not care about ensuring my constituents have access to health care. But I can promise Albertans that an NDP government will get this project done. Can the minister explain why the UCP has failed to get even one single shovel in the ground for the South Edmonton Hospital in 4 years?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, the capital plan from 2022 has over $371 million provided for this project. That money is already being put to use. There is site works happening. There's servicing work happening. We are in the middle of a functional design plan because, again, we need to know what design to do before we can build it. That's the order of construction, and that's what we're looking forward to working on, and that's what we're doing, making sure that we have a plan to meet the needs of all Edmontonians, especially those in South Edmonton, and build them a facility that works.
Member for Edmonton Whitemud.
The minister should visit the site. Nothing is happening. Given that Edmonton is currently short over 400 hospital beds, and that number is projected to more than triple in the next 3 years, and given that some Edmontonians have to drive nearly an hour to get to a hospital that will no doubt be overfull with long wait times and staff who are stretched too thin, and given that this government has thrown public health care into a crisis, making the need for a new South Edmonton hospital even more critical, to the minister, can he explain to my constituents why the UCP has abandoned the health care needs of Edmontonians, of those living in communities around this city, and all Albertans, as a matter of fact?
Good question. The Honourable the Deputy Premier and the Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, we are doing the work that the NDP failed to do. We are developing a plan. We are making sure that we meet the needs. The first thing you have to do when you do a good building is have a good plan. What are we providing for the services for those in Edmonton? Is it ambulatory care? Is it emergency rooms? Is it surgery suites? We need to answer these questions through our service providers, Alberta Health Services, work with the Ministry of Health. Once we have that, then we can go to design and building. We look forward to doing that. We continue to invest money in the capital budget from 2022 and beyond, and we will provide healthcare services.
The Honourable Member.
Well, given that South Edmonton is one of the fastest growing areas in Canada, and given that the last hospital in the city was built in 1988 when Edmonton's population was almost half of what it is today, which is why the Alberta NDP committed to building the South Edmonton Hospital, and given that my constituents are tired of asking why the UCP keeps delaying this project, and I think they're ready for a change. So this is our commitment. The Alberta NDP will get the South Edmonton Hospital built, and we will deliver public health care for all. They can count on it. Is the minister getting used to the idea that we will finish what he can't even start?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Yeah. A great example of what the NDP didn't do is Grand Prairie Hospital. 14 years to deliver. Again, the NDP makes promises they can't deliver on. Where you start with building is with a good plan. We are continuing to work with the residents of Edmonton and South Edmonton, and we have an obligation to all taxpayers in the province to manage their finances well and appropriately. We need to build a building that will serve the needs not only today, but into the future. And we're developing that plan, something the NDP failed to do in their 4 years in office.
The Honourable Member for Cypress Medicine Hat has a question.
Mr. Speaker, Albertans are hearing conflicting reports concerning the Premier's proposed liability management incentive program. The Premier argued that this thinly veiled corporate welfare scheme somehow doesn't undermine the polluter pay principle. She stated that the projects to be cleaned up were, and I quote, left with somebody holding the bag who may have not been responsible for the initial liability. Given, Mr. Speaker, that oil and gas under our feet is owned by all Albertans, to the Premier, why should Albertans be left holding the bag for private companies who pumped every last cent out of these wells before they abandoned them?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the member is just getting a little ahead of his skis here. As with any government, we're looking at a variety of ideas and programs. Now, one we're exploring in the Department of Energy is the Liability Management Incentive Program. But it's a program that's still under development. It requires further stakeholder engagement and consultation. So I would just ask the member to have a little bit of patience, and we will release the information and details in due course.
The Honourable Member for Cypress Medicine Hat.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier and this Energy Minister have very different ideas of how this program may actually work. Given that this Minister has indicated that projects belonging to active, financially responsible oil and gas companies may be considered under this revised R-Star program, and given that the Premier has been more adamant that the pilot project will be reserved only for abandoned and orphaned wells, will the Premier now actively commit, right now, that if all Albertans must pay for this, at least it'll be limited to orphan wells that have no current owner?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, the basic premise of the Liability Management Incentive Program is to encourage further well site cleanup. So we want to focus on some of the most challenging sites that are out there, some that have been around the longest, say inactive for greater than 20 years, so those from the 60s and the 70s. We know that industry are good stewards of the environment, and we want to support those efforts while encouraging new investment and creating jobs while we're at it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Cypress Medicine Hat.
Given there is a long history in Alberta of major projects being used to feather the nests of lobbyists and companies close to this government, sometimes, like the case of the massive overbuild of Alberta's electrical transmission system, these companies hail from Eastern Canada. Given that the Premier has personally lobbied for a similar program in the past, and given that orphan well cleanup is being billed as a job creation project for Albertans, will the Premier commit to at least ensuring, if the polluter pay principle is abandoned, at least all of the out-of-province companies will be banned from participating in any facets of this?
The Honourable the Minister of Energy.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, as mentioned, the details of the program haven't been released yet, so I think the member is just jumping to conclusions here. I can say the program that does not change anything around the new liability framework or with Directive 88 and the mandatory spend requirements. Those will remain in place. The liability incentive program, it's meant to be a supplementary thing and very targeted to some of the oldest liabilities. So consultation is ongoing. It's early days. It still has to go to caucus, committee, cabinet, Treasury Board.
The Honourable, the member for Edmonton Manning and the Deputy Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite overwhelming public objection, this Premier still plans to fire the RCMP and saddle communities across this province with a new provincial police force, all with new bills and new bureaucracy that will come with it. Now, while the minister ignores the feedback that we're getting from councillors, municipalities, the RMA and more, we've been listening. And we can't find one municipal partner that supports this bad policy. Can the minister tell us who exactly supports this failed policy that's being forced on Albertans, and why are their opinions more important than those of Albertans?
The Honourable, the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness.
So, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. As I've indicated before, there's no decision that has been made regarding the Alberta Police Service, and we can continue to consult with municipalities and First Nations communities. I guess my question, though, I mean, we have nations such as Siksika that are interested in doing their own police service. You know, so what? And we have had other municipalities. We've had other First Nations that are interested in doing their own policing service. So I guess the message coming from the NDP to the First Nations communities is, we don't care what your opinion is. We don't care what you have to say. They're going to impose whatever they want in the First Nations.
The Honourable, the member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, given the government might want to go back and look at their Sovereignty Act, and given that all across this province communities are struggling with the rising cost of everything, and given that the City of Red Deer already explored the idea of leaving the RCMP and abandoned it over a decade ago, and it's clear that this minister isn't a fan of common sense, and given that the minister had his chance to listen and he chose to put the Premier's demands over what Albertans are asking for, Albertan communities don't want the UCP to impose $735 million per year on a provincial police force, period. Why isn't the UCP listening?
The Honourable, the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services.
Mr. Speaker, I mean, contrary to the NDP's belief, many people, including the federal government themselves, have been talking about reviewing and moving away from contract policing for years. Exactly. Mr. Speaker, a 2019 briefing note provided by the Federal Minister of Public Safety, and let me just give you a bit of a quote here. It says, "It has been the Government of Canada's objective since the 1960s to decrease," Mr. Speaker, let me say it again, to decrease its contract policing financial liability. Mr. Speaker, we are listening to municipalities, we're empowering municipalities, and we're hearing...
The Honourable, the member for Edmonton Manning.
Well, given this government likes to say there will be cost savings with their new police idea, but that is based off a report that was paid for by this government. And given that other reports not commissioned by this government show the opposite, including what's going on in Surrey, and Alberta municipalities can't afford to gamble millions of dollars in loss of services on hypotheticals or reports bought and paid for by the government. And given that this minister refused to listen to what people are telling and insists, even as recently as last week, on standing behind this awful plan, I'm just going to be clear, Mr. Speaker. The Alberta NDP government will keep the RCMP and invest in community safety.
The Honourable, the Minister.
So again, I'm hearing the NDP say to First Nations communities, we do not care what you have to say. We do not care what your opinion is. We will force the RCMP on you. They have no respect.
Order, The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford will come to order. He may not like the answer, but he's entitled to give it. The Minister of Public Safety.
On this side of the House, we're trying to empower municipalities. We are...
Order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford will come to order. The Minister.
On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we are trying to empower municipalities, we are trying to empower our First Nations communities, and we are trying to listen and do what is best for them. We want to hear from them. We are listening to members like Siksika. We are listening to First Nation communities like Enoch, and they are giving clear direction, and it is not towards the NDP.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview. A point of order is noted. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Riverview.
The Office of the Auditor General released reports on long-term care and COVID-19 and continuing care facilities. The reports make it clear that long-term care and continuing care facilities were poorly resourced during the pandemic. Shortfalls in staffing, resources, and procedures were known. They were noted in previous audits raised by those living and working in these homes. The UCP government failed to make the homes of seniors and the workplaces of our frontline heroes safe. To the Minister of Health, why has this government failed in supporting Albertans living in continuing care?
Well, the Minister of Health has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for the question on this important issue. Mr. Speaker, through you to the honourable member, we are investing in our continuing care system and supporting seniors. Mr. Speaker, we accepted all of the recommendations made by the Auditor General, and Mr. Speaker, a number of those recommendations we have already acted on. Mr. Speaker, as part of Budget 2022, we invested over $200 million in capital to be able to expand our continuing care system, including, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that we had enough spaces for seniors so they didn't need to double up. And, Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to invest.
The honourable member for Edmonton Riverview is next.
Given that the report highlights that paid sick leave would have halted outbreaks in long-term care facilities, and given that mitigating outbreaks could have saved lives, and given that the official opposition proposed paid sick leave and drafted a bill that the government could have introduced during the pandemic, but they ignored it and failed Albertans. To the Minister, why ignore real measures like paid sick leave that could have improved the care and saved lives of Albertans?
The Honourable Minister of Health has the call.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member knows, the facility-based continuing care review identified staffing as a significant issue in regards to the continuing care sector. And Mr. Speaker, that same review identified that we also need to actually transfer our approach from congregate care settings to home care settings. Mr. Speaker, we started that process in Budget 2022 with an additional 1 million hours in home care. And Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward to the budget that's going to be released today, and we'll talk more about the investment that we are making to improve continuing care for seniors and for all Albertans.
Given that continuing care residents 5% of COVID-19 deaths in the province, and given that while they were dying, the now Premier was spouting conspiracy theories about the pandemic, even now she seems more focused on getting the people who undermined the public health response out of their criminal charges than improving care. Can someone explain to the surviving relatives of thousands of Albertans who died in the continuing care system during the COVID-19 pandemic why they didn't implement life-saving policies?
The Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we invested significantly during the COVID crisis to support those most vulnerable. I appreciate, again, the research being done, or the report being done by the Auditor General. We accepted all of the recommendations in principle. But just want to be clear, Mr. Speaker, we invested hundreds of millions of dollars, both from a staffing standpoint to provide PPE for those who are the most vulnerable in a continuing care setting. Mr. Speaker, we learned from the waves 1 and 2 that we needed to only have single rooms, and we're investing it to make sure that we can.
The Honourable Member for Calgary East has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Public Safety. According to the latest statistics, crime rates in Calgary have been on the rise for the past 2 years, with significant increases in property and violent crimes. Can the Minister please inform the House what measures the government is taking to address this concerning trend?
Of Public Safety and Emergency Services.
Very much, Mr. Speaker, and of course thank the member very much for the question. Of course, public safety is very important in our large municipalities, Edmonton and Calgary. People have a right to feel safe in their homes, Mr. Speaker. Children have a right to play outside. And, these sort of rights are being infringed upon right now. And that's why we created the Calgary Public Safety Task Force. We've been working with multiple levels of government, and we've deployed several initiatives that we believe are going to be in place. And believe me, several more will be coming to ensure that families, that people that live and work and play in Calgary can feel safe within their communities. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Calgary East has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister. Given that the recent reports have highlighted the growing concerns among Calgary residents, particularly in high crime neighborhoods, about their safety and well-being, can the Minister elaborate on how the government is working with local community leaders and law enforcement agencies to address these concerning concerns and ensure the residents feel safe in their homes and neighborhoods? Thank you.
The Minister of Emergency Services.
So, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and thank you again for the member for that very important question, especially to his residents, many of whom do not feel safe in their homes with the gunfire that has been going on, with the gang-related activity. I can tell you that, of course, through the department, we've been in touch with the Calgary Police Service to make sure that they have the necessary resources to go after those gang members, because I can tell you, in this province, we are not going to tolerate gang members instilling fear in our community members. Let me be very clear to that, Mr. Speaker.
next.
Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Given that the COVID-19 pandemic and related economic pressures have contributed to the increase in crime rates in Calgary, can the Minister provide details on any specific programs or initiatives being implemented by the government to support vulnerable populations and how this has improved public safety in Calgary? Thank you, Minister.
The Minister.
Sure. Thank you very much. And yes, Mr. Speaker, absolutely. Of course, we work very closely with the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions to make sure that those officers that are being deployed, whether it be through the Calgary Police Service or the sheriffs, have the necessary resources to provide support for people, especially vulnerable people, to be honest with you, Mr. Speaker. I can tell you that it's not about moving people along. It's about ensuring that they have the resources, including the Health IM app, to make sure that those individuals are actually getting the help they need in a pathway to recovery and treatment, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton, Highlands, Norwood.
Violence against women, girls, and gender diverse people has created a shadow pandemic over the last 3 years. Overwhelming demand for support services, compounded with high inflation and inadequate government funding, has left shelters overwhelmed and survivors struggling. This government has completely turned their backs on survivors. This is disgraceful. Will the Premier commit today to addressing the funding crisis that women's shelters are facing? Stakeholders are here today. They're listening. Tell them your plan.
Yeah. Honourable the Minister of Seniors and Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for the question. I share her deep concern for women that are fleeing domestic violence, and want to assure her and anybody that's finding themselves in a situation where they're in a domestic violence situation, that this government is there for them, this province is there for them. We'll continue to work. We continue to work with not-for-profits across this province to make sure that there's a safe place, that there's support for people in that situation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Highlands, Norwood.
Given that nearly 1 in 2 Albertans has experienced sexual violence in their lifetime, and in the last few years, survivors are reaching out and they're asking for help at record rates, which is a good thing. But because of lack of government funding, survivors are waiting months, even years, to access counselling. And given that the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services has made it clear that funding is desperately needed to shorten wait times, address the complex needs of survivors, access justice, and offer prevention programs, do the right thing today, Premier. Show your government cares. Fund the organizations doing the critical work to support survivors.
The Honourable the Minister of Seniors and Community Services.
Again, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for her question and her concern. I'm pleased to report that I've been working very closely with our Parliamentary Secretary for the status of women. We have been going across the province, meeting with frontline service providers, not-for-profits, and working to understand what the challenges are to make sure that we do have the funding in place to meet the needs that are there. And again, I continue to look forward to working with our amazing Parliamentary Secretary for the Status of Women, as well as our fantastic not-for-profits, to work towards addressing these challenges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member.
Given that the Alberta Council of Women's Shelter said it best, survivors deserve better, Alberta deserves better, yet crickets from this government. This is your legacy, Premier, one that eliminated the Status of Women Ministry, one that abandoned survivors of violence, one that continually attacked women-dominated sectors like healthcare and education, one that purposely denied nonprofits essential funding, all while having billions in surplus to give away to your corporate buddies. That's the legacy you're leaving, Premier, and you should be ashamed.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure what the question was there, but I'm happy to address what's being said here. This government has demonstrated compassion, and we will continue to work with not-for-profits across this province in all sectors, especially for women fleeing domestic violence. We have increased funding for shelters by 10%. We have increased funding for folks that work in the disability sector by 10%. We fund women's shelters $51.3 million a year. Anybody who is in a domestic violence situation will get help in this province. You have my commitment to that, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to work with our not-for-profits. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The order, the Honourable Member for Edmonton Northwest.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta's post-secondary students and the schools in which they learn are crucial to Alberta's economic recovery. Unfortunately, students are struggling because of decisions made by this UCP government. The Premier and this minister have approved hikes of anywhere between 16 to 104% in tuition, more than $10,000 in additional fees, removed access to grants, underspent student aid, slashed funding to post-secondary at record levels. So that begs the question, Mr. Speaker, why would the post-secondary minister make it so hard for students to get a post-secondary education?
The Minister of Advanced Education.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the member is curious about why it's so difficult, he should ask his boss in Ottawa, Jagmeet Singh, who is working with Trudeau to jack up the carbon tax. Reckless spending is driving up inflation, Mr. Speaker. That's one of the reasons that post-secondary students are struggling, is because of a cost of living crisis created by the Trudeau Liberal and Jagmeet Singh alliance, Mr. Speaker, through reckless spending. We are taking action. A couple weeks ago, I announced a series of affordability measures to help our students while the NDP sits there and does nothing.
The honourable member for Edmonton Northwest.
Really, Mr. Speaker, I mean, given the tuition in this province was amongst the lowest in Canada in 2019, now it's the highest. Students report increases of more than 30% to their tuition because of this minister. And given that they didn't even get a piece of the Premier's so-called affordability plan announced last year, they're having to sell their vehicles, skip meals, and pile on debt just to make ends meet. How does this minister stand in the House with a straight face, which he doesn't even do, he has a smirk, and knowing that the pain and the suffering of students he is personally responsible for?
Sounded a lot like a direct personal attack on the minister, which the honourable member knows is not appropriate. The Minister of Advanced Education.
It's okay, Mr. Speaker. He can buy me a coffee afterwards and it's all done and dusted. Although I have to correct the member. I'm not sure where he's getting his information from. I think we talked about this last year. I encourage the member to look at Stats Canada. Again, it's a very reliable source of information. And I really don't know what the member's talking about when he says that tuition prices are the most expensive, because that is simply not true. The average undergraduate tuition rate right now in the country is $6,800. Alberta is just above that at $7,100, far below neighbouring provinces, far below Ontario, far below Saskatchewan.
The honourable member for Edmonton Northwest.
Well, given that this government is forcing more and more costs onto the backs of students who are already struggling due to the UCP's countless poor decisions. To date, $700 million has been cut from universities, colleges, and polytechnics. $700 million. And given that they have done this while the Premier somehow finds $20 billion to hand over to her friends and insiders, can the minister then explain why they get the support and our students do not?
Mr. Speaker, it sounds like the member missed the press conference, but we've announced a series of affordability measures to help our students. We're eliminating the plus 1% on student loan interest rates to help students cope. We're extending the interest deferral period from 6 months to 12 months. We're extending the repayment assistance program. And as well, Mr. Speaker, we're adding more money to student financial assistance to help those who need funding the most. Mr. Speaker, we are taking direct, real, and measurable action to help our post-secondary students right now and well into the future.
The honourable member for Calgary-Pagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Making life affordable for Albertans continues to be a top priority for this government. We will continue to aid Albertans in achieving financial security by a variety of means. Our policies have already provided support to a multitude of groups such as seniors, AISH recipients, and families who are struggling with inflation and affordability, in large part due to poor federal fiscal management. Our government has laid out plans to help protect the bank accounts of post-secondary students, starting with implementing a tuition cap. To the Minister of Advanced Education, how will the new tuition cap benefit Alberta students?
The Honourable the Minister of Advanced Education.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member. You know, one of the things that students have been asking for and been lobbying me about over the course of the past 4 years has been stability and predictability when it comes to tuition policy. We currently don't have that because of the cap that the members opposite created that's allowed tuition to increase by 5.5% this current year. We're introducing a new cap that will establish a base rate of 2%. Institutions will not be permitted to increase tuition by that 2%, giving students and families predictability and stability.
The Honourable the Member for Calgary-Pagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that our government aims to provide a foundation for Albertan graduates to be successful contributors to our economy, and given that upcoming and recent post-secondary graduates will still face financial barriers, and given that these individuals will require government support, what new supports are available for students who have already graduated or are graduating before 2024-2025?
Minister of Advanced Education.
Yeah, so recent grads and upcoming grads will benefit from some of the affordability measures that we've just announced. We are extending the the student loan deferral period. Right now, students have a 6-month window after they graduate to begin repaying their student loans. We're going to extend that out to a year. We're changing the interest rates on student loans. That'll affect all current and future borrowers, giving them more ability. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we are expanding the thresholds for the repayment assistance program to help those recent graduates who need assistance in repaying their loans.
The member for Calgary-Pagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you through you to the Minister for that answer and for recognizing the value of Alberta post-secondary graduates. Given that our government is prioritizing affordability for all Albertans, and given that as a result we have already put significant measures in place to lighten the financial load on Albertans, how do these new measures support other initiatives to make life more affordable for all Albertans?
The Honourable the Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, addressing the cost of living crisis is a top concern for the government, and as the member noted, is being driven largely by reckless federal policies. But Alberta's government is focused on making life more affordable for Albertans, our post-secondary students, seniors, and other individuals. I know the Minister of Affordability is working hard to address that. And these measures that we've announced a couple weeks ago will help our post-secondary students through some of these challenging times and help them transition into rewarding careers in the near future.
Order, order, order. That concludes the time allotted for oral question period. In light of the budget coming at 3 o'clock, we will continue to the remainder of the daily routine immediately. If you are leaving the chamber to prepare yourself for such activities, please do so quickly, quietly, and appropriately, and out of respect to the remainder of the member statements, beginning with the Honourable, the member for Calgary-Bular-McCall. Oh, you changed. The Honourable, the member for Edmonton, Beverly-Clareview.
Mr. Speaker, it's been over a year since Ukraine was invaded by Vladimir Putin's Russia. It's been a long year of watching cities devastated, families and communities forced to flee the onslaught of devastation wrought against a peaceful country by the Russian Federation. There are heartbreaking stories of people losing their loved ones, of communities devastated by invasion and bombings. But throughout it all, Mr. Speaker, we've seen heroism of people standing up against the invaders, determined to crush a free and independent Ukraine. We've seen compassion both around the world and right here at home with Premier Stelmach and Thomas Lukaszuk, who shipped tons of aid and supplies to Ukraine and filled planes full of refugees who found their way here to find peace and stability as this illegal and immoral war continues. It's been a year of pain and hurt for Ukraine, but the people of Ukraine are still standing in defiance of the tyranny of Putin. Now, there are those, including the Premier, who suggested that the only solution for Ukraine was neutrality. The Premier even stated that she thought the invasion was understandable. Although I appreciate that she corrected her wrong opinion, it still caused harm to the Ukrainian community here and those fleeing violence. Some may never forgive what she said. Mr. Speaker, I'm deeply proud of my Ukrainian roots, and I know so many Albertans are of theirs. As a province, I know that we will continue to stand up for Ukraine and its people. Slava Ukraini.
The Honourable the member for Vermilion, Lloydminster Wainwright, has a statement to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because of the federal government persistently employs newspeak rhetoric to disguise its progressive ideological policies, the referencing of George Orwell has become necessary. In his essay on politics and the English language, written in April 1946, he said political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable. Happily for the Federal Ministry of Truth, a leaked memo exposed the rhetoric of the Just Transition policy as classic newspeak. The actual aim of Just Transition was revealed to be the murder of the Alberta oil and gas industry, albeit a respectable murder. A quote from the memo gave the game away. Canadians thrown out of work by climate change programs can get jobs as janitors. The memo revealed that they intend to throw 2.7 million Canadian employees out of work into janitorial jobs. Surely no political party leader in Alberta can know this situation with good conscience sit on their hands. However, the leader of the opposition's hands are tied because her federal boss has already signed up to this attack on Alberta's oil and gas industry, the industry which provides the funds for the social programs socialists claim to champion. Then conscience is obsolete. Happily for Albertans, their Premier has not sat on her hands. Indeed, she is squarely on her feet. She proved this when, immediately and without compromise, she called out the newspeak rhetoric of the Just Transition policy. I know the Premier, along with my UCP colleagues, will continue to expose Just Transition newspeak euphemisms and resist this ideological attack on Alberta until it's defeated. However, we should heed the admonitions of Thomas Jefferson, who said, "The price of liberty is eternal vigilance," because once we stand this dishonest nonsense packing, Canada's federal government will launch a new attack on our province.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Presenting petitions.
The Honourable the Member for Spruce Grove Stony Plain has a petition to present.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to present this petition coming from the Southwest Edmonton community of Edgemont. Spearheading this petition is the Edgemont Community League School Advocacy Committee, who have obtained 480 signatures. Right now, the children of Edgemont have the longest average commute times to school in Edmonton, and this petition seeks to comprehensively address the educational infrastructure in the area by building a much-needed K-9 public school in the community of Edgemont. Thank you.
Notices of motions, introduction of bills, tabling returns and reports.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 59013, I rise to table the appropriate number of copies of the 2023-2024 estimate schedule. Here.
Are there other tablings? Seeing none.
Tablings to the clerk.
Honourable members, that brings us to points of order. And at 2:22, the Honourable the Government House Leader rose on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be short. At the time that you mentioned, the member from Edmonton-Rutherford clearly shouted, after being warned by yourself, "You're making this stuff up." I don't have the benefit of the blues, and I suspect it may not even be caught up by the ambient mics, but I sure heard it, and I suspect many other members of the chamber heard it. That kind of language isn't appropriate for this chamber, especially because it was directed at a specific member, the Honourable Minister of Public Safety. I believe this is a point of order under 23HI and J, and I encourage that member to apologize, withdraw, and do better.
The Opposition House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the member, we withdraw the comment.
I accept this, consider the matter dealt with and concluded. Orders of the day, orders du jour.
Government motions. Motion number 20, Honourable Mr. Scow.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to move Government Motion 20 on the order paper, and it reads as follows. Be it resolved that pursuant to Standing Order 39, the Assembly stand adjourned at the conclusion of its sitting on February 28th, 2023, and reconvene on March 6th, 2023.
Honourable members, pursuant to Standing Order 39, this is a non-debatable motion. Having heard the motion as proposed by the Honourable the Government House Leader, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. In my opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered. Honourable members, in order to allow adequate time to prepare for the budget address by the Honourable the President of Treasury Board and the Minister of Finance this afternoon, the House stands in recess until 3:15.